And now, it's the moment you've all been waiting for, the Drunken Tyromancy Show. Ha 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 ha. Yes, 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 yes. There we go, there we go. It's all happening here, folks. It's all happening. Now, I had indeed thought to myself about writing something a little bit more along the lines of comedy. And so I got to work and started writing, and well, actually first I got thinking about what it was that I would write. Hang on, I'll just switch headphones. Hold on here a minute. So, so I got thinking about what to write, and for some reason, that's right, I was watching an interview, and here's Zelensky like rubbing his nose, and he's not just got an itchy nose. It's like it's that cocaine kind of rub sort of thing, and those sort of, and it just seems like such a bizarre pantomime parody thing that this guy is such a cliche of being a coke fiend. I mean, it's actually quite weird to think that the people behind all this stuff, this is their level of thinking, that they thought it was a great idea to put a coke addict up there as their front person. And then I started thinking, well, isn't it a bit coincidental that Mr. H. Biden just happens to be about the same age as Mr. V. Zelensky, and just happened to have like a lot of dealings in Ukraine, and maybe kind of went there and hung out with his buddy, Mr. Z, and they both did a bit of like snorting, it's like they might have snorted some white stuff out of each other's butt cracks. They might have, oh, Jesus, I got a mosquito in there, and maybe like sucked a bit off each other's appendages, something like, that just, buddies do. It's like if you like them. I mean, I don't know what they get up to, but given some of the photographs that were revealed, it's like nothing would surprise me. Anyway, so I just kind of like had these kind of comical scenes going through my mind. And as I said, like, I don't want to trivialize things. Certainly not when there's serious stuff going on and people are suffering, people are dying. But, I kind of felt the need like to have a bit of a laugh. But I also think I've still got other things to get off my chest. And besides which, it's one thing to write some comedy, but it's another thing entirely to actually film it, and just doing it sitting down here like this is not exactly easy. And so far as like recording when I'm up and about is concerned, the only kind of mobile video recording devices I've got, like one is that sort of old chunky digital camera, which I just got from my dad. So that's like pretty old now, and it doesn't play well with other things, and I'm missing some of the cables and software and stuff, and some of it's not compatible with the, all that stuff. And the other things like my old phone, when my previous iPhone, which was a hand-me-down, as my previous ones also were, when that one died, I didn't want to like spend a lot of money on a new phone because, they're expensive things to get, and it's a hell of a thing. And I mean, I have like all these other expenses of things that are actually going to make me money. So because I also hate phones, I hate this thing that like it's expected that we're going to carry it with us wherever we go. You'll always be contactable. Like, where were you? Why didn't you have your phone with you? It's like, because of you. It's like, so anyways, kind of like the phone's really not that great for recording. I mean, it can barely even store, in fact, it doesn't store half of the apps that I had on the previous one, and I didn't have that many installed, but now it can't even do that much. So I kind of got this older phone because it was cheap and refurbished, and that didn't play out too well. So anyway, long story short, to film sketch comedy is probably going to take me a while because I figured, okay, I've got to get a bunch of stuff off my chest so that I can kind of loosen up. So I'll deal with a bunch of serious topics first, hopefully build up a bit of an audience, and gradually, hopefully people start subscribing and supporting, and then I can sort of get a new bit of equipment here and, whatever, and getting better with things and, meeting some people and eventually, be in a position to, write and produce, some clever content. So in the meantime, you're going to see a lot of me sitting here. Anyway, hope you don't mind, but I will at some point at least get myself some wine and cheese, because as long as this is called Drunken Tyromancy, I probably should be both drunk and doing tyromancy on the show for you, a live demonstration. So anyways, I have started writing a couple of funny bits that I've been thinking about for a while, and I'll keep writing them, and I'll keep writing other stuff, but I'll just leave that off in terms of production because I can't really do it yet on film. Meantime, I thought to write myself a little article here about the self-defeating nature of fascism, like an absurd, dark comedy. And in here, I'm kind of taking the piss because really it sort of blows my mind. Not just this whole thing of the absurdity of the fact that you got these two coke fiends up front, one being the son of the POTUS and the other one, being their hero in green. It is ridiculous that these are, the next generation of the elites. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sure we all really aspire to being like them, Anyways, so I thought about this, self-defeating nature, and I don't just mean the way that they make gaffes and mistakes and things like this, but within the ideology of fascism, there is literally some self-defeating stuff which comes about precisely because of the underlying nature of fascism itself, and which, in order to actually get rid of it, you'd have to cease being a fascist, right? Because the very things required to not do that stuff are antithetical to fascism. So the whole ideology locks them in a decision-making process which makes them more likely to do all these stupid things. And if you have a look through history, all the kind of, and it doesn't matter whether it was before or after the original coining of the term fascism, I mean, that's irrelevant to me. It's as the saying goes, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, and the same thing with fascism, if it walks like a fascist and quacks like a fascist and Zig Heils like a fascist, then it's probably a fascist. It doesn't matter whether the person was from a completely different culture, from a completely different historical period prior to the first person ever using the word fascism. What matters is, was it the same ideology? And then if you have a look at the underlying, because these ideas go back in history a long time. It's the idea of being a hypocrite, doing to somebody else what you would argue against if they were doing it to you, but pretending like you have a right to do it and they don't, and then ignoring the fact that they don't even want to do it. They just wish you were stopping doing it to them. They have no interest in that. But you have this mindset that's but this is superior, being aggressive and dominating and trying to fuck everybody over because I'll be the superior predator. It's no, you're just a dickhead. It's you can use all these words all you want, but you're just a dickhead. And I just don't know if these people are capable of seeing it, really. So anyway, I wrote this article. If you go and have a read it again, it's on Substack. Oh, actually, before I go on too, I just want to say thank you for the, 3-4 dozen people, maybe a few more than that, who have already watched one of my earlier videos. I mean, I've only produced not even half a dozen pieces yet. And it was really nice for me to see, in the statistics that people are starting to watch it, even though, I've spent nothing on promotion because I can't afford, a promotional budget. I've just kind of posted a few things. I'm experimenting as I go. And it was really nice to see that, so many people had watched it, because I was actually expecting the growth of people watching it to be much slower. And maybe this is, I guess, because, friends might tell friends and so forth, and you get that whole thing of sharing it with people and, it comes up in their feed and whatever. So whatever the reasons, thank you all very, very much. Put a smile on my face to see that. And I hope you will continue to, like and share the whole kind of bit, and that it will, continue to grow so that I can, sort of get the things that I need out of this to keep doing it. Anyways, so back to the story. Now, one of the interesting things that I point out here in this article is that these kind of, self-proclaimed elites in power, it seems to me from watching them that, there's really not much these people actually know, and as I often frame it, they know nothing of consequence about anything of consequence. I mean, if you asked them about, logic, maths, philosophy, engineering, sciences, art, other things, it's like, maybe they've got appreciation of a handful of things, but they don't strike me as people who really understand anything in depth, other than fascism, being a dickhead, maybe banking, enslaving people, murdering people. But it's like that's their whole gamut of knowledge. And a lot of that they do by proxy. Somebody else is doing it on their behalf, They're just these kind of like utterly useless parasites. And so, yeah, like there was a guy who, I love this guy's work, but he was saying how if, like with everything going on in Ukraine, like the West kind of, catches up and industrializes, then like, maybe even Russia won't be able to fight them anymore, sort of thing, like because the West has all this money and wealth and stuff, and like if they really kind of reindustrialize. Now, I would imagine that idea comes out of looking at the past and, sort of World War I and World War II, where there was an industrial base. But here's the thing, it's not going to happen. Reason being is that back then you couldn't get away with the economy that they have now created, right? You had to have technicians, you had to have engineers, you had to have all this stuff because there was no automation. Remember? Even like milling and turning, like originally you did it by hand. There was no like 5D, CNC milling machines. That didn't exist. And so you had to have highly specialized people who had been trained for a long time. And like you would need literally to catch up to even where we should be now had they never kind of defunded all this stuff and deindustrialized. You would still need generations to catch up to where we would have otherwise been. Forget about accelerating beyond that in order to catch up with countries of a vastly larger population who never deindustrialized, right? It's just not going to happen because the experienced level of teachers, professors, lecturers and stuff, many of them are dead or retired or left the country because not only did the people in power make the profession absolutely miserable for intelligent and decent people. I mean, they really turned it into a misery because these guys were working their asses off for decades trying to make up for this ever-dwindling pool of resources and ever more insane instructions coming down from on high. And I remember having a talk with a lady who was I'm pretty sure she was an Australian academic, and she was working, though, with academics from other countries. Back in the 70s, possibly the 60s as well, I can't remember when she started, but she was telling me about how the collaborations that they used to do were amazing. And it was such an honor for her working with so many brilliant people from all around the world. And she said, this pretty much doesn't happen anymore. I mean, there's like a little bit of it, but it's nothing like the way that it used to be. The projects that they would work on together, the research that they would work on together. And so you're missing this whole generation of people. Besides which, there has already been at least one other generation of teachers and lecturers and professors who've come through who are sometimes just like a little bit incompetent because the better ones didn't want to go into the profession because they saw all this shit happening, because they were smart enough to see all this shit happening. I thought, I don't want to be a part of that. So they went and got a better job overseas in a country where they weren't doing it, right? Now, I'm not saying this is universal, but in a lot of cases, there are some very, very mediocre people who came through. And I don't mean that as an insult to them, just that, look, they're not the best. They're nothing approaching it. And I've seen some of the better ones who were brilliant. I was very, very lucky to have a few lecturers myself who not only understood their field of expertise, but they were fascinating to listen to. they were brilliant teachers, and they understood the idea that when you are a first and second year level university student, that the role of a lecturer is to hold your hand, like as if you're in kindergarten, and walk you through that knowledge, because you need the foundation before you can conduct your own learning. But the new generation of teachers, they have this excuse of, like when they show you like all these shit resources and their shit explanation and the shit everything else, they're like, oh, but you've got to learn how to learn and stuff. Like, but how can I learn from this shit? Now, I was doing tutoring at one stage, and sometimes even tutoring subjects I myself had never studied. But I did it by simply like looking at the textbooks, and if I had to, like treating it like a maze where you go from the exit and head back towards the start to figure out where it came from. Like you sort of going from both directions to figure it out. Just helping other people to learn how to think by giving them techniques where it didn't matter that I'd never studied it before. It was about like reading the text and understanding what they were trying to say, not expecting for the answers given in the book to necessarily be correct as well, because that was another thing that I found, was that you had official textbooks with errors in them. You had official textbooks with the most appallingly bad use of English. Where it didn't even look like the person who'd written the textbook actually had English as their first language. Now, arguably, sure, they could have been an American. Just joking, guys. But, and clearly nobody edited it, or certainly nobody with any greater talent than the person who wrote it, because just the explanations were rubbish. And these poor kids in high school, and, poor kids fresh out of high school into first year, university subjects, they had no idea that it wasn't their fault that they were struggling to learn the material. So think about this, right? This self-defeating nature of fascism, what did they do? They defunded education. They made it uncomfortable for real thinkers to be in there. They forced people into retirement. They quietened them. They did everything because they knew that the academic sector was effectively the enemy of their ideology. And it was, because any free-thinking, intelligent person, what the fuck would you be a fascist for? It's the dumbest fucking thing you could ever believe. It is hypocritical in nature, and it's stupid. It is stupid and self-defeating, and anyone with half a brain can see that. So you have this whole field of academia, which typically speaking, in the past had a massive, real left-wing bias. And I don't mean left-wing in terms of supporting the LGBTQI thing. That's the faux left, right? Because on the one hand, and I say this as a true leftist, so this is the real difference of what it should be, right? On the one hand, if you are gay or bisexual or even transsexual or whatever, so long as you are harming nobody else, I couldn't give a fuck. It's none of my business, right? So long as you are harming nobody else, right? And sure, if somebody's picking on you and being threatening towards you and so forth, and they don't have any valid reason to do so, sure, I would be the kind of person to say, hey, leave the dude alone, right? He's a bit weird, whatever, but that's his business, right? Or her business, right? Not yours. They don't have to live by your values any more than you have to live by their values, okay? Just leave him alone. If you've got a reason for suspecting this person is doing harm to somebody, which is outside of just your personal values, and you can genuinely show cause, fine, but still, let's not beat the person up. Let's just deal with the actual issue. And I kind of suspect in that regard that the whole reason why this whole very militant LGBTQI plus thingy happened was initially as a response to the overbearingness of conservatives who'd probably created the problem in the first place and then made it worse by coming down on the very people they'd created through their conservatism. But because these people are also highly emotional about their thing, they are easy to manipulate for a political agenda. And what do the fascists want? They want proxies. So this is like one of their little domestic terrorism proxies, right? They took a otherwise valid cause in terms of hey, we don't want to be beaten up on the street, we don't, want to be persecuted, blah, blah, blah. So fine, right? That's all a legitimate complaint. They shouldn't be beaten up the street. They shouldn't be required to live like somebody else, so long as they are harming nobody. But when you take that further the way they have done, well, that's now where you're a useful idiot, You are being used to pervert society. Why? Because some of the people in power are even fucking weirder than you, right? Utterly creepy as fuck weirdos. And what do they want? They want the rest of the weird army who, from a rudimentary conservative perspective are kind of like them, and they can hide amongst your ranks and they can use your thing as a way to bring forward their vastly more radical agenda, where, for example, they want the world to start referring to pedophiles as merely like minor attracted persons, like as if it was some kind of, at worst a disability that they're a minor attracted person, but they need understanding. It's like, no, you're a child rapist, and as such sick, and at best should be an institution. But anyway, that's again like a topic for another day. But so the point being is that anything can be used, and the true left would defend people, but without taking to extremes. The true left is supposed to be about egalitarianism, humanitarianism, socialism, anti-war, that kind of stuff. It's not supposed to be about take every fucking bleeding heart story and just forget about how it might be used, be completely politically ignorant and just put it up there. No, that's the ideology of an idiot. The academic left wing was about being aware of real history, what really happened, narratives that are rewriting history, and keeping society educated to remember the truth, because they know that these very violent people with really fucked up agendas want to have a dumbed down population. They want to have a mindless population, a brainwashed population who are easy to manipulate, right? That's what it's all about. How do you get power? Manipulate the masses. So, on the one hand, the fascists saw the opportunity to empower themselves by disempowering academia, but on the other hand, the bloody idiots didn't kind of realize, but you see, this crowd that you're disempowering, they are the ones who consistently come up with vastly more of all the brilliant stuff, right? Your guys who lean more towards your ideology, they do come up with some stuff from time to time, and some of it, is brilliant. But the vast majority of the best ideas in the world come out of this other side, and you just disempowered all of it, right? How long is it going to take to rebuild that and then to train the next generation to actually have all the people that you require to spread the knowledge, to spread the skills, to so on and so forth, right? That takes generations to fix, and that is why you don't have to worry about the West suddenly reindustrializing like World War I or World War II, because they haven't got the capacity, because this is just one of many, many areas in which they shot themselves in both feet, both knees, both elbows, both hands, both hips, probably shot themselves in the dick, shot themselves in the chest, shot themselves in the head and the neck and everywhere else, right? It is insane what they did. It makes no sense whatsoever what they did. But they did it because of short-sightedness, stupidity, and just this reactionary approach to, are you with us or against us? Everything about their reasoning is like, a retarded child could do better. Seriously, if you put these people in a room against a retarded child and gave them some kind of test, I'm quite sure that the retarded child would beat them a hell of a lot more than you might think. Because so long as the retarded child isn't also a fascist, then they've already got one up on them, because they haven't got their brain polluted by this insane self-defeating ideology, which you cannot believe in once you understand the facts. You can't do it. You have to be oblivious. You have to have, brainwashed yourself or been brainwashed by others. I kind of wrote a few things here and, sort of made a few points with respect to things that actually, one of their fields that they like to pride themselves on, it seems, being propaganda, PR, like the whole messaging and narrative thing. One of the things I find interesting about that is like, okay, well, if you guys are the specialists, if this is the one thing that you're so good at, how come you miss so many lessons from famous literature. I mean, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, for Christ's sakes. Here you are using the exact same playbook again and again and again and again. Because why? Because Goebbels or whoever it was told you that, if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe you. Well, sure, but did you forget the one that said, you can fool some of the people, all the time, and all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time? Did you not combine that with The Boy Who Cried Wolf? The more you keep using the same bloody lie without anything happening, the more people start to wake up. The more they wake up, the more immune they become to the next lie, because it's based on the same playbook. And you guys didn't even invent the playbook, you just inherited it. The only thing you've done is hire other people to add new technology to it. That's it. That's all it is. It's the same really archaic, barbaric thinking, and it's stupidity. I mean, as an evolved modern person, you should be able to do better, and the fact that you can't means that you are not an exceptional anything other than exceptional asshole. Anyways, so so I kind of found it funny that they've missed the great lessons from literature when this whole thing of like narratives and media and PR and stuff, is supposed to be their speciality, and yet they seem to be incompetent at that too. So as I said, these people know nothing of consequence about anything of consequence. And so the degradation of Western society, in terms of the prior industrialization that we used to have, you could argue that it kind of really began in the 1970s. So there was the sexual revolution of the 1960s where people were distracted a bit, but it seems like that it was in the early 1970s where they kind of really began the program of starting to just defund things, disempower things. They attacked the militant union movement around the world. They infiltrated the union movement and started to put their own people in there so that the unions would never actually really fight, but would just kind of get you like a little bit here and a little bit there. It was all kind of probably by pre-arrangement, or alternatively they just got like a useful idiot in there who they could easily manipulate with various psychological tactics so that they would take exactly what you were willing to offer them in the first place, but you'd pretend like there was a little bit of a struggle so they'd think like they won something when in fact they were actually behind in real terms, where they were before. Anyways, so all this stuff's been going on since the 70s, and so we're now at a point where, with generations having passed through, skills are being lost, knowledge is being lost, expertise is being lost, experience is being lost, and if you want to, repair that in order to reindustrialize, because you have to repair this knowledge base, the skills base, before you can sort of really do anything on a big industrial scale. We don't have that. So, forget about the West suddenly magically doing that again. They've already spent 5 decades at least destroying the whole foundation of that kind of thing. Anyways, so, and this bloody thingy again. So, like, I witnessed, as I might have mentioned on a different video, like I witnessed falsehoods taught in science classes, and I'll actually tell you the example. I might as well. Good video for it. I was doing was genetics, and in that subject, we learnt about an experiment which actually formed the basis of the pharmaceutical industry in a sense, where a guy showed how you could effectively culture a bacterium to concentrate a particular gene that was present in that colony of bacterium, so that you could kind of create this little biological manufacturing unit for whatever protein that gene codes for, right? And how to upload a new gene into the bacterium and then culture that so that you could get the very specific protein you were after, instead of like having to hunt around for bacterium that might already produce it. You have a stock of the gene, you get any bacterium, you upload the gene, and then you culture it, and bang, it's producing the protein you want. So that's how in many regards, a lot of pharmaceuticals are manufactured, because if it's based upon something that they found in nature, but it's like they want to just mass manufacture it. It's easy enough to sort of get the gene that makes it and then put it into bacterium and just get them to make it for you. I'm sure there's probably other means as well, because there's certain things that probably aren't of that same nature, so they come from a different type of chemical process. But I'm just talking about this one particular experiment and what it was for. And I'm sure it probably has other uses too. But anyway, so fair enough. Look, nothing wrong with that experiment, nothing wrong with the conclusions there. But having explained that, what they then did in this lecture, and I'm pretty sure it was a PhD student who was giving this part of the lecture, and the professor, lecturer, was kind of standing off to the side, kind of supervising, maybe because they were letting this person get some experience at teaching. But what this person did was they brought in a story or another conclusion that, that's right, yeah, it was a story about another experiment done because of that experiment, whereby they showed that a certain class of chemicals was present and vastly more concentrated in the skins of organically grown fruit and vegetables. And what they concluded from this was that GMO crops, get this, because this is just completely fraudulent, right? But they said GMO crops are therefore better for your health, right? Because this class of chemicals are carcinogens, and the GMOs have less of it, right? Well, here's what they did. And so this is why I was one of only 2 people in the room who noticed this, and I was the only one who could explain it properly, because we were like mature age students and everybody else is fresh out of high school. So, they were just listening and accepting what they were told by, the authority figures up the front. But essentially they used the wrong word, because that class of chemicals was not a carcinogen. That class of chemicals was a mutagen. And if you want to understand the difference between these two words, well, you could say it like this. I mean, this is not technically exactly true, but near enough for the explanation. So you could say, all carcinogens are mutagens, but not all mutagens are carcinogens. So if you understand that basic concept, then you get the difference. So effectively, when they said carcinogens, they should have said mutagens. And that subtle difference in meaning was enough to fool the audience. And I suspect probably enough to fool the lecturer himself, the PhD student himself. So they probably weren't even aware that they were telling a lie. Now, there's a possibility that they did know that they were telling a lie, because that university was connected to a glycomics institute where they would have had a hell of a lot of money from that global multi-trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry. So it was in their interests to say what those people wanted them to say. Why? Because they're heavily invested in GMO crops, right? So okay, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that they just too were fooled. Maybe somebody else figured out this kind of subtle use of language and put that through. I guess a third possibility is also just that maybe they'd never thought about that subtle difference in language, and because they had a personal bias and they didn't understand that difference, when somebody, when they were talking about it, when somebody else said it to them, wherever they got this incorrect word from, they just didn't notice that what they should have said was mutagen. And so they never thought about the flaw, because they had that bias towards the conclusion they'd already drawn in their own mind. And given the fact that they probably get their own personal funding for their own personal research from those companies, I'm kind of inclined towards maybe they actually did know. And that's unfortunate. But I'm willing to consider that they didn't. Anyway, point being that you can imagine what it takes to really be a rigorous thinker, especially when the time pressure is on in a university setting, because essentially you have a government and other people dictating to you what your studies are going to be about, even though they're not the ones paying. They're putting a debt on your shoulders, so it's none of your business. Like, if you're going to make me pay for this, even if retrospectively, then it's my business, not yours. Fuck off. But they're dictating to you, the terms of all this education, and they're putting these time constraints on you. Why? Because what do they want? They want people who didn't have time to question it, right? They want you to know just enough to do your job, to do things for them, but not enough to figure out what they're doing with it, right? Because they know that most people would have massive moral objections to the things that they're doing. And I will do a video on the scamdemic because, yeah, look, just quickly, and anybody who knows me has already heard me say this a million times, but for the benefit of everybody else, the scamdemic was, and I mean CV19 by this, okay, it was the single most obvious fraud of any kind in the entire global history of fraud. And if you don't understand that, then don't tell me you're a scientist, don't tell me you're a medical professional, because you're incompetent at best, all right? If you have been to university and studied sciences, particularly in the field of health and biology and genetics and chemistry and so forth, then you learned, and I know you learned, the very things which disprove the claims that would need to be true for the CV19 narrative to be true. Right? It is contradictory to previously established facts. Well-established, irrefutable, quite fundamental facts of science and logic and reasoning and evidence and the scientific method and everything else, okay? That narrative didn't have a shred of valid science to it, and I mean that quite literally, not a single shred, because it's based upon another fraud, which goes back even further in history. So I probably will do a video at some point about the truth about health and disease and how they really work, and if you want to know about how I know such things, well, that's got to do with like a lot of family history and my own personal studies, of course, but a lot of it with family history. But anyway, I'll go into that in another video. But as you can imagine, that a society with an education system which is no longer functioning, you know, and as I mentioned before, I mean, look, I've tutored kids in primary school. I've tutored kids in high school. I've tutored first and second year university students. I've tutored people in subjects I've never done. I've tutored people in subjects that I myself was struggling with, right? Why? And how? Because I understand how to analyze information. Right? I understand how to determine fact from fiction. And that's a very, very specialized skill set, which used to be taught a lot more and comes out of philosophy. So you could think about it like this, okay? Philosophy gives rise to logic. Logic specializes into maths. Maths applied becomes models. Models specialized become sciences. Sciences applied become engineering, right? If you can understand the foundation in philosophy, then you can kind of start to see that whole track, but you have to get back to the foundation of it first, because if you're somewhere along the track, it's not as easy to look back as it is forward. You know, like if you understand maths, then well, you can see maths used in chemistry, but you might not understand how maths comes out of logic and comes out of philosophy before that. And if we have a society where people aren't learning these things, I found one time when trying to find a course on philosophy so that I could, you know, study it formally, that it was only taught at one of the universities that I was looking at, and I think I looked at like 3 or 4, but only one of them was actually teaching it. And instead of teaching it in the sciences faculty, it was being taught down like a kind of, you know, back corridor of the arts and humanities faculty. Now, I don't really quite understand what it's doing there, you know. Now, I know that a lot of people probably think of philosophy as gazing at your navel and smoking a joint and staring at the clouds and, you know, wondering if you're just a dream in the mind of a butterfly. And sure, that's one interpretation of what philosophy is about, but it's not the one from which a lot of the sort of formalized, rigorous thinking comes out of. Not to say it's not useful as well. Certainly, if you like a spliff, I'm sure it's very useful, but, you know, that's not what we're on about here. So anyways, let's move on a bit, because I've kind of been rambling on a lot. I mean, I don't know, maybe you enjoy me rambling on. So what do we got here? So there's this crisis in the education system. You can look at that, at how it's basically going through to pretty much most other industries. And essentially the paradigms and the ideologies behind the decision making is flawed, so that no matter which area of life you look at, you can see the kind of mistakes they're making. And just to give you another example of this too, but in a different direction, I was doing a lot of research over prior years, over the past 2 decades especially, to do with personal projects and personal vision. And amongst that, I actually found, I remember seeing a video a long time ago by a guy called Avery Lovins, who is like the head of, I think, the Rocky Mountain Research Institute, something like that. And they had looked at the internal combustion engine motor vehicle. And on this video, he was explaining how this internal combustion engine motor vehicle used only 0.2% of the available energy in the fuel to move the mass of the driver forward in space-time, right? So think about that. 0.2% of the available energy in the fuel. So when I say available energy, okay, in thermodynamics, I believe the term is exergy. And what it basically means is there's a whole bunch of energy in the fuel, but you can't use all of it, not through just a regular combustion engine reaction. In order to use the rest of, well, I mean, part of the energy, part of the reason you can't use all of it is because you can never have a perfectly frictionless machine. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So even if you did have a perfectly frictionless machine, the best you could theoretically ever get would be 50%, right? But also because a lot of the energy locked up in that fuel as a chemical molecule isn't necessarily available through a combustion reaction, right? So for all these various reasons, there are maximums on what you can get out of it. And so you have this available energy, and then you have, the efficiency of how that is used. And what they were saying was that only 0.2% of that available energy actually moved the mass of the driver. Now, the reasons for that, and mind you, we're only talking here about the available energy in the fuel, right? So there are a lot of other areas of waste that go on, but you have vibration through the vehicle. You have vibration in terms of, sort of physical vibration that you might not hear, but then there's other vibrations which maybe you can't feel them in the sense of vibration, but you hear it. You have other vibrations in terms of, like sort of other, frequencies. And this is all like, energy lost. You can think about it in terms of heat as well, because, you're going to be heating the actual engine block. You're going to be heating the exhaust manifold. So you got all this heat just coming off, which isn't necessarily going into anything actually productive in terms of like drive power. So, they had a look at the motor vehicle the way that was. This is just like a standard production model domestic car. And they designed a new car with the intention of, improving that performance a great deal. So they redesigned an engine, or they used an engine designed by somebody else. I can't remember which it was, and on which subject actually saw an amazing video about a type of orbital engine developed by a guy, I think it was here in Australia, because the lecture that I saw him giving was here in Australia. But no word since then, and that was back in the mid to late 90s when, mid to late 90s when he did that conference. So in all the time since then, clearly isn't in use, which means it could be one of those things which just kind of got bought and shelved, which is a shame because he even had a working model of it in the lecture, and it was quite a clever design. But anyway, whichever engines they used something vastly more efficient. But then they also looked at things like how you can get the most lightweight vehicle, how you can retain the most heat energy in the cabin space when it comes to heating, how you can retain the most cool environment when it comes to cooling. So they looked at all the sort of insulation for the vehicle in terms of, double glazing, whatever they did with, maybe aerogel kind of stuff in between the layers of glass. They did loads of things to see what they could do to make this vehicle more efficient. And I'm sure that in the field of electric vehicles that people have thought about these things too, but we also know, of course, there's a massive problem with the mining that goes on to make the batteries and so forth. For myself, I actually do have my own thoughts on this field, which I'm not going to detail here because if I'm right, it means like, multi-billion, multi-whatever kind of thing. And, it'd be a bit stupid to put it on a video. But yeah, like there's a lot of things that they don't consider. Anyways, so same shit, different bucket. We look across the industries, what we see, is all this inefficiency, all this waste. Why? Because the ideology of the people making the decisions is just dumb. And so all their decisions are dumb, and they pollute the information sphere with stuff to cover up their own crimes, cover up the failures in their own ideology. And so with everybody operating at a reduced efficiency intellectually, because the people at the top are busy cramming bullshit into your head, right? And then making you feel emotionally attached to that bullshit so that you won't question it, right? This is making you less of a good thinker. And you can think about it like this. I kind of came up with this analogy a while ago for other things that I was writing. But it's kind of like an onion skin thing where if you're familiar with the term cognitive dissonance, which you could interpret as meaning like a discomfort that you feel as a consequence of a clash between your beliefs and reality, right? So you experience cognitive dissonance, and people resolve this in various ways. Now, the best way to resolve it, if you are genuinely wrong and reality is trying to tell you, is to dump the false belief. You lose the cognitive dissonance, you lose a false belief, you learn something, you become smarter, and you no longer have to experience the cognitive dissonance, right? Best solution, nice and simple. But because people get attached to their beliefs, what do? They double down and defend it. What are the so-called elites doing? They're doubling down and defending their bullshit ideology, right? It's dumb as fuck. Anyone with half a brain can see that, but they're defending it nonetheless. Why? Because I guess they want to be stupid. And again, it's like that quote from Doctor Who I used the other day. Peter Capaldi, by the way, was that doctor. Where, yeah, he sort of, poses the question to them like, thinking it's just a fancy word for changing your mind. I will not change your mind. Then you will die stupid. It was like pleading. Then you will die stupid. Why would you want to die stupid? Why? What, to protect yourself from losing a bit of face? Jesus Christ. We've all been embarrassed at some points of our life. Grow the fuck up. How do you think people like me got smarter and wiser? It was because when we were embarrassed, we didn't use that as an excuse to double down all the time. We eventually looked at ourselves and thought, what if they're right? What if I do have to question something? Oh, wow, I was wrong about this. Hey, isn't that fascinating? And I took an interest in reality. I developed a relationship with reality. I found a love affair with reality. Because reality is full of some pretty cool stuff. There's music, there's art, there's humor, there's science, there's maths, there's logic, there's philosophy, there's wine, women, and song, there's tyromancy. It's crazy, man. So, yeah, I'm inclined to think that our exceptional elites are really underwhelming folk. Because I just don't know how anybody could go on for generations and generations and generations and never get the idea that all of the bullshit is their fault, right? Like, I know that there would be misfortune in life anyway. It's like, nothing's going to stop the odd occasional axle on a cart breaking as the farmer, takes the bags of wheat down the road to the market and, maybe the horse busts its leg. Misfortune happens. But what these people at the top do is they manufacture misery, suffering, death, slavery, exploitation, bullshit, brainwashing, just endless piles of shit. And then they have the gall to call themselves elite when the very best they can do in life, with trillions of fucking dollars at their disposal, is to create bullshit and fuck up the world. What is it that's elite about that? You have a very, very low standard indeed, and you are not elite. Not at all. Not even a little bit. Yeah, and certainly not a tyromancer's asshole, that's for sure. Anyways, so moving on. So Yeah, so look, I wrote a bunch of stuff. Feel free to go and find the article. And like, I mean, I mentioned in there stuff about the multipolar world as well, because I mean, like, you know, I'm far more excited to live in a multi-world than the shitty crap being created. I mean, who the fuck wants a world where there's McDonald's everywhere and it all tastes the same and it's all poisoning you? What? Oh, but the kids love it. It's like, yeah, well, the junkie likes heroin as well. You've got them hooked on sugar, for Christ's sake. And you're a parent? No. What? It's full of all sorts of fucking crap. Just has enough sugar in it to make them go crazy, and you think they're having a good time. No. Their body's going nuts. Their brain's going nuts. And you take that as them having fun and being happy because they're all screaming and laughing and carrying on. They'd be screaming and laughing and carrying on had you made a really nice, healthy meal, didn't make it a misery for them to eat it, you actually knew how to cook, you gave them nutrition, they were healthy, and then you did fun stuff with them instead of like sort of using the TV as a nursemaid. There are so many ways to make your kids happy. And before you say, because yeah, true, I have no kids, but before you say, as has been said to me before, you have no kids, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, I had somebody say that to me once, and that person said of her son, you know, he won't eat Brussels sprouts, he won't eat mushrooms, he won't eat such and such of this young boy. And I knew it was bullshit. It was just that she made it a misery for him. So one day I was cooking in the kitchen and this kid, I didn't see him, but I heard him, and peripheral kind of senses, I knew it was him. Like I can tell the way that he walks and stuff. He comes into the room adjacent to where I was in the kitchen. And so I pretended that I hadn't noticed him, and I just started ham acting. So I'm tasting the thing that I'm cooking, which has every ingredient she said he would hate in it, right? All of them. I'm literally cooking all the stuff he hates. And so I started tasting it. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, I just need a bit more of this. And, you know, so I'm just ham acting about how wonderful this thing is, pretending that I don't know he's there. Kids are easy. It's not that hard. You know, and especially if you don't make them hyped up on sugar. That's why you're having a problem, idiot. Anyway, so, you know, I ham acted, and what does he do? He comes up to me. Oh, what are you cooking? I didn't know. I said, here, have some. Put some on a spoon. Here, try it. He trusts me. Of course he's going to try it. You know? He's just seen me having fun with it. I didn't scare him off by telling him the ingredients, which he thinks he hates too, because his mum convinced him that he hates them. And he tastes it, and it was nice. I said, do you want me to make a little bowl for you? He said, yeah, sure. So I gave him a bowl. He's off, eating it. Surely at some point he noticed that it had all the things in it that he supposedly hated, but he finished the bowl, right? Point being, it's like you don't need kids to figure out kids. You just need to think about things from their perspective. You know, it's like, I mean, can you remember being a kid? Try. Might do you some good as a parent. Anyway. So, yeah, a few more things that I wrote here. Okay, yeah, and just with respect to the consequences of all of these inefficiencies and bad decisions and wastes and stuff, I was thinking in here about one of the other aspects of the self-defeating nature of fascism is their completely false belief that the world is overpopulated. And I could probably do an entire separate video on this subject. But all that shows me is that they can't do primary school level arithmetic, right? Now, I've heard various, you know, arguments in defense of their position, but there's nothing that I couldn't shoot down with ease. I mean, it really, really shows a lack of critical thinking skills and a lack of awareness about other ways of doing things. You know, I mean, you have to begin with the assumption that only certain things are possible, which you never even stated as an assumption, never validated in any way, and never challenged any of the other contrary points of view to justify calling this a necessity, right? If you begin with that, sure, you can argue a case that the world is overpopulated for these and these reasons. But the fact is that those alternatives are there. They have been proven countless bloody times. There's, you know, massive amounts of evidence for it. You really can't deny it once you know what it is. So I'd probably have to cover it as a separate video to really talk about it. You know, the whole kind of overpopulation bullshit myth. But you see, the real reason why, we have resource starvation, of groups of people, at any one time is really just because of all of the inefficiencies and waste and destruction. I mean, warfare itself, and I saw this through somebody else's post recently, and sorry, I did have some cocaine, so I just got, just doing my Zelensky moment. It's like, what was I saying? The military turns out to be something like, now this is just based on usage alone, like resource usage. They are the equivalent of the fourth or fifth largest country in the world. Like that, they would be that fourth or fifth largest country in a graph. But that's just usage. And so the argument that I make here in the article is that expenditure is a different thing than usage. Usage is just what they're using to make their ammunition, make their tanks, fuel their machines, train their people, blah, blah, blah. It's what goes into it. But the total expenditure of the military includes what they destroy in warfare. And what they destroy is not just the lives of people, not just the infrastructure, not just the opposing team's staff, but it's like, which mind you, we don't count twice because that was already counted in the usage thing. But we have the additional other stuff that they destroy. But it's also the flow-on effect of that. Because remember, all of the people who are coming into this military conflict had to be taken away from other places where they would have otherwise been doing other things. So all those other things and the flow-on effect of that is all lost. When they die, they can't even go back to it. So you've, into the future, lost all of that. Any influence they would have had on any other person also lost. So many things that are lost. And so if you total all that, I would easily bet that what we are up to now is like doubling it. So it would be like creating the most populated and resource-hungry country in the world, or something near it anyway. And if you look at that as like, okay, if we didn't do war, right, or at least if all we ever did was, sure, each country might have armed forces, but they were all in public hands. There were limitations on the salaries of, sort of anybody working in those organizations. There was no such thing as bonuses, right? So there's no financial incentive at all for creating a war artificially, right? If you can create that economic circumstance, they're not going to go to war, are they? Why? Because they need a big financial incentive to bring it all to war. If they've got no financial incentive and they can't get one, then they're not going to do it. So you need it in public hands with salary caps. But mind you, you also need to take the corruption out of politics. And I would argue from there's other things you need to do too, but that would do the majority of the thing. And then you would have just a kind of reasonable military kind of thing in each country, just as a sort of a purely defensive measure. And if you stick to international law and everybody kind of like, supports it, so if there's ever a situation like Palestinian occupation, people come in, they say, right, this is the one time under international law we are allowed to come here is because you are trying to invade these people. And they asked us, hey, come help. And we did, right? Because that's really the only thing we need. And that would make it very, very, very rare that we would spend such vast resources. We would get the vast majority of that stuff back. There would be nobody left in poverty. Nobody. There would be nobody not living a comfortable life, right? There are other measures we can do on top of that as well. But now think about that in terms of all of these mines, right? Now think about this. And I'll tell you a little story for this one, right? I watched a documentary many years ago about building supercomputers. And there was a guy who basically designed, operated, maintained, built these supercomputers. And he's sitting on a stool being interviewed in this big kind of clean warehouse room with banks and banks and banks of hardware behind him. And what he said astounded me. He's looking at the camera and he says, you know what? I don't know why people pay me to do this. I really don't. Because one human brain is the equivalent of 200 million of these machines linked in a network we barely understand. So here's my advice. If you want a better supercomputer, go find somebody you love, have sex and make a baby. And I just thought, wow, that's brilliant. This guy was effectively arguing to put himself out of a job. because he thought, like, why am I even doing this? Like, we have human brains. Why aren't we learning to use them properly? Think about it. There is very, very little genetic difference between you and me. I don't care who you are on the other end of this camera. There's very, very little genetic difference between you and me. And I know that because there's very, very little genetic difference between me and a gorilla or a chimpanzee or whatever sort of thing, right? Like, you have to take a far greater leap away in the evolutionary tree before you get a monumental level of genetic difference. Like, most of the genes are like common, right? Now, sure, it doesn't take much in genetic change though to make like a manifested physical change. So I'm kind of, in some regards, exaggerating things a little bit. But the point is, you and I have approximately the same hardware in our skulls, right? So therefore, if you consider yourself to be a stupid person, and I've met plenty of people who said like, oh, Trev, you're really intelligent, but I'm just not that bright. I can't get this stuff. It's like, okay, I would argue to you this. You may not have been trained to think properly. You may very well have chemical imbalances. I mean, the brain uses enormous amounts of resources. How do you know that you're not suffering like lead poisoning, heavy metal poisoning of some other kind? You could be. Maybe you don't even know it. Maybe you never got tested. How do you know you're not nutritionally deficient? How do you know that any of these and many other factors aren't affecting that? The hardware is still roughly the same. And if it is true that humans are only on average using, say, 3 to 5% of their brain at any one time, I don't know exactly how that statistic works out or where it comes from, but just let's, for arbitrary sake, say that it's true and a useful piece of data. Well, then would it not be true then that means I'm only using a marginal amount more than you? I might in fact be using less of my brain than you. Maybe I'm just using it more efficiently. That's possible as well. Maybe it does come down to emptying your head of bullshit and preferring to believe nothing, right? And I often say it in this way, like, if you really understand something, then belief becomes redundant, right? Knowledge doesn't exist in the absence of understanding. In the absence of understanding, you cannot claim to know, and belief is redundant when you do know. So anyways, it's like, I think that we all have the capacity for immense intelligence, but there's also how it's expressed. Because just because I express mine in this way, and I happen to be very good with words, doesn't mean that your intelligence isn't equally amazing in a different area. I've met guys who have the most insanely good memories, and mine is nowhere near as good, not even approaching it. These guys can recount stories and details and data about particular things that they're just fascinated by, dating back decades. And I'm often stunned hearing, some guys who've just described themselves as being stupid as like recounting all this stuff. And I do remember one particular guy that I worked with years ago on a gig when I was just a roadie and rigger and scaffolder and stuff. And this guy, said something like that to me about being stupid. And I said, dude, you're not stupid. Did you not hear yourself telling me that? Like, I couldn't remember all that kind of stuff. That's a valid form of intelligence, is this ability to memorize vast amounts of things. And there's many other forms too, creative intelligence too. Like if you've got a brilliant painter, I don't care if they understand maths. They have that. And all of it's useful in its own way. And therein lies another thing too, is that, the so-called elites, like, they don't get this. They don't see the value in these things. It's like, if they personally like something, fine, they'll support that thing, right? But they don't want to support everything. I mean, they're quite happy to take from everything and everyone, but they don't want to support everything, and they don't see an issue with that hypocrisy. I'm going to take from everyone and everything, but I'm only going to give to those things that I approve of. And it doesn't matter if I actually have a valid argument against anything else. I'm just not going to give to them because I don't approve. So I'm going to hoard all these resources. I'm going to starve all this other stuff because I don't like it. Well, what do you think is going to happen to the world? It's going to be now lacking all this stuff. Anyone else who did like it, who was otherwise inspired by it to do something brilliant over there, well, now you're missing that thing too, because that never happened because they needed that for that to happen. But you didn't understand that, did you? No, you just saw the thing that you wanted, and you just supported the people that you wanted to support because you think that's how it works. It doesn't. You know, as a person in power, you cannot predict who is going to be the brilliant musician, who is going to be the brilliant mathematician. You cannot predict who's going to be the brilliant scientist, engineer. You can't. Now, you think you can because you do this. You grab a select group of people who you know are going to be malleable or subservient or on side with you or whatever, and you say, these are the people that I will fund. And, see, this one's brilliant, therefore I was right. I can predict the brilliant because I gave them money. And because I gave them money, they got the education, and that's what made them brilliant. It's like, yeah, but you're comparing it to a situation that you don't know, and you are assuming that it wouldn't have been greater. What evidence have you got that it wasn't going to be greater the other way? None. Not a single shred of it. And you're too dim to have seen that, right? That's not very bright. That's bleeding obvious. And you missed it. So don't tell me you're elite. You know, if that's the way you think, you're an imbecile. Anyways, so, yeah, and I bring up a case in here in the article of that car by Avery Lovins because of that whole thing of like the 0.2% of the available energy in the fuel, because the other thing that strikes me about this is if you then add to that inefficiency of just the machine itself, now look at the inefficiency of where do we drive? Why do we drive? When do we drive? What went into manufacturing the car? Do we have another vehicle for another purpose with a whole other design team that makes the exact same car in every mechanical respect, but they just put a different badge on the front? You know, all of these stupidities into, you know, that and you know, how is our traffic management system? Like, you know, there are so many things that go into waste. Now, of course, the elites and the globalists are currently using all this stuff as an excuse under the brand name of climate change, which I would argue is, at best, a misinterpretation of science and a dumbing down of science to a catchphrase which is simple enough so that imbeciles can repeat it ad nauseum and convince people there's something to be afraid of, but it's nothing more than just... It's like how they railroad any movement that comes along. So you know, going back to the LB, you know, the gays and bis and whatever else, you know, going back to those dudes. So, you know, may they have had a legitimate initial, you know, issue that they needed dealt with of being to use them for an agenda. You can see how... they railroad other, you know, Black Lives Matter. You know, were black people getting shot by cops? Yeah. You know, did they need something like Black Lives Matter? Sure. But somebody else comes along and, you know, railroads the agenda for their purposes. And so then, you know, everything gets confused and people aren't sure anymore of like, oh, you know, should I support this thing or not? It's like, you know, look, I think the same thing is true with climate change. And it's all because of this game brinkmanship. Okay, this is what's going on. Now, you and I know it by its common tongue name, the game of chicken. And you've seen it in movies. Like, you know, when you got two guys, you know, they're in cars and they're driving straight at each other and it's like a game of chicken, like who's going to like swerve first? And they're like, ah! And then one guy swerves and, you know, they you know, the other guy drives off or whatever. Or they both crash, you know, depending on which film. But the point is, that game of chicken is in the political sphere called brinkmanship. And the whole idea of brinkmanship is to take some situation to the brink of disaster as a way of creating fear in your opponent to get them to do what you want, right? Now, it doesn't matter to the elites whether the thing that they're making you afraid of is real or imagined, right? They don't care. Excepting insofar as that if something at least has a component of truth to it, then it's easier for them to make you afraid of it, because that component of truth allows for things that you don't have to fund, you don't have to organize, you don't have to do. They're just happening anyway. And all you do is like film it and record it and misrepresent it, take things out of context. Now, you can add to that by filming your own little fake bits, of course, too, and you throw that into the mix. Because, typically speaking, people struggle to get beyond this idea of a false dichotomy. This thing is either true or false. What about if it's both, right? Did you ever think of that? So, you know, they look at the LGBTQI thing and they say, true or false? Well, because they disapprove of gays, they'll say, oh, it's false. It's not real. It's just an agenda. It's like, no. These people in history, I remember when this, went on long before this whole movement thing started, where these people got beaten up. They didn't want to get beaten up. They started to protest and they started to make it public and so forth. Now, did they get used for an agenda? Yeah. Why? Because they want conservative people to be afraid of them. Now, what was inserted into that whole narrative to make you afraid? Well, what they did was they got real perverts who were, doing something sick, like seriously sick. Now, it's none of your business where somebody who they like, it's like, that's not their business. So long as they're both consenting adults, it's none of any of our business, right? Right? I don't care what your religious belief is. That's your religious belief. You keep that for you, right? We don't get to, because if you get into this whole world where one set of values gets to tell everybody other set of values, no, right? We have to have a basis for anything like that. And the basis is hypocrisy, as I mentioned earlier, okay? So if something would be hypocritical, sure, fine. Then we can impose it, where the consequences of failing to do so means that an innocent party comes to harm. It's not that complicated, guys. It doesn't require calling on supernatural beliefs or any other bullshit. We can just use logic, and then it's really quite easy to solve the problem, right? Now, climate change is the same thing. It's just a game of chicken or brinkmanship. Now, the phrase itself is just this dumbed down catchphrase. It's like a brand name. It's a marketing name. It's got nothing to do with science. It's just a name that stupid people who know nothing about science can repeat ad nauseum, and that foolish people who might be competent in science can also repeat ad nauseum, because they never bothered reading the research, or they're the ones who are taking money, sort of thinking, geez, I hope I don't get caught with my trousers down. Like, geez, I've taken a lot of money from these people. Geez, I don't even dare to reveal the truth anymore because I'm kind of complicit now, or whatever the hell's going on, right? And I don't pretend to know all of it, but I will say this, okay? The term climate change no more describes the full gamut of ecological issues that we face than does the term global warming. Neither one of those terms adequately describes anything, right? Because what you're really looking at is this, okay? If you have people consuming resources not for needs fulfillment, but for just this wasteful bloody, capitalism, like consume things so that somebody can make pieces of paper or digital numbers in a bank account somewhere, and you literally are trying to maximally exploit any resources you can get your hands on while taking the least possible responsibility, preferably none, for any and all deleterious consequences of that exploitation, because taking responsibility would constitute a cost that reduces your profits. The entire economic system is saying, don't take responsibility for the bad side. That's somebody else's problem. That's an externality, right? You just take the profits, right? You just take the wins, right? Let other people pay the consequences, right? You're going to get ecological issues because people are going to come through forests and wipe the whole damn thing out, because the maximum number of apartment buildings they can build comes from wiping everything out. You level the playing field, just build what you want. Fuck nature, let's just do this. Now, there were entire ecosystems of species there, right? Am I arguing for us living in caves? No, God damn it, no. Am I arguing for us to go backwards technologically? No, none of that's necessary. You just have to use your brain a bit more. There are a million billion different ways you can do of things, and there's a million ways of reasons for doing things. And we just happen to be living within a world run by systems where the worst possible reasons are chosen, and that's where all this waste comes from. As a consequence of that, not as a consequence of population per se, but the effect of population with this system and where warfare is manufactured and other things are manufactured that just waste and destroy. The actual needs fulfillment for those people, for that population, is just a fraction of the rest. Most of it is waste. Most of it is inefficiency. Most of it is destruction. That's where most of our resources go. Most of them, more than anywhere else. Right? Needs fulfillment is what we have to focus on. But of course, you can't trust the idiots at the top now because they're the ones responsible for the bullshit you're seeing. And I'm sure that if they took anything that I wrote or said seriously, they would find some way of fucking it up. And I think that in some regards, it is possible that that's actually what's happening with this whole globalist agenda, and where they talk about climate change so much, is they probably believe themselves to be the hero of a thing which they heard misrepresented, probably intentionally misrepresented in some ways, to create fear so that they could control the way that the solution will happen, because they think they understand. Why? Because, well, they heard something from their advisor. It's like, and they probably didn't understand a word he was saying, and he's probably not the most competent, but the one that they liked the most, So, yeah. So brinkmanship is a game that you have to understand, because that's one of the reasons why this whole ideology of the people at the top is self-defeating. Because what they are doing is they're constantly grabbing everything and turning it into this game, because what do they want? Power, control, domination, to create fear. They want their agenda set after. It doesn't matter what reality is. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. They don't care. They're rich. They never have to pay consequences. So we end up with the shit that results. And anyway, yeah. So, and I finished with this quote, which I think I put in a previous one, but I repeated here, which is basically, look, we live in a world run by ideas and systems which are biased towards those who hold themselves to a lower standard, right? The reason why people who hold themselves to a higher standard do not succeed as often and as easily and as quickly and as well is because it is harder, and because they're living in a world where it is easier to do the wrong thing, and you get rewarded faster when you do the wrong thing. And because that means luxury and cocaine and hookers and whatever else people are after, it means that other people are going to see it and they go, I want some of that, so then they support that. And then they see you trying to cause trouble for their little money-making machine. What are they going to do? They think you're the enemy. So they attack. They have no comprehension of the fact that they too would be better off if they supported your thing, because while it is harder, it is also vastly better. Their shit isn't anywhere near in the same league. It's not even on the same continent as being in the same league. They do garbage because that's all they understand. That's all they're capable of. And the fact that they make a bunch of money, and because people think of money as success, people think, oh, this person, he's so rich, he must be intelligent. No, he's a dickhead. He's an idiot, right? When did you truly hear any of these super wealthy people say anything that was amazing? I mean, truly brilliant, I'm talking about. I can't think of the time. I know that there are people who've been reasonably wealthy who've said stuff like that, who've been reasonably successful, but the guys at the very top, they're not the great thinkers of society. They're not. There's not a single work of great literature or anything like that you can put at the hands of these people. They come up with the dumb stuff. They come up with the bit where they're caught on camera being interviewed, too dim to understand that they are admitting on camera for potentially all the world to see for the rest of time that they are a racist who wants to murder people. That's the thing that they're remembered for. That's their brilliance. You know, don't be impressed by them. Anyway, and also don't be afraid of them too, because like in a lot of respects, these people really always big note everything. Like they blow out of all proportion how good they are, what they're capable of, blah blah blah. And a lot of it's just smoke and mirrors. It really is like the Wizard of Oz. You know, it's like the entire movie industry. In fact, have a look at it. It's like it lends itself through fantasy and science fiction and other fields, which I mean, I personally love those genres, but I hate the kind of stuff that typically Hollywood does, because for me, they don't understand what science fiction is supposed to be about. So, for example, Asimov, brilliant author, and his work, Foundation, was insanely insightful. But that current TV series, I've only seen series 1 so far. I haven't seen series 2 yet, and I'm hoping that they repair it. But I mean, God, is it ever a disappointment? It's like they missed the entire point of what he was trying to say, or they intentionally misrepresented it, because there was a really deep, profound message in there which they have absolutely, utterly butchered and betrayed. You know, and it's hard to decide some days whether this is just the best they're capable of, or if they just don't get it. But Asimov was brilliant. That's what sci-fi should be about. And unfortunately, it gets used by the American military and Hollywood to sell you the lie that, you know, there's no use resisting because we're this powerful and we got magical warriors like Thor and, you know, Captain America and all this stuff. And you don't realize that it's like people kind of know it's fiction, but they also treat it like it's fact. But it's not fact. That's bullshit. That's Hollywood, the special effects, right? And if it's a Hollywood story about a real world event, it's most likely a propagandistic lie to make themselves seem like the good guys and the other dudes seem like the bad guys, when if you get into like the history of it, well, actually they were funding the bad guys, pretending to fight them and setting them up to fight somebody else so that both parties would weaken each other. Yeah? Anyway, you get the point. Anyway, I'll leave you with this thought, or maybe I'll say, hey, just go to Substack and read it. What did I say here? Oh yeah, I'll leave that one there for you to read if you want to read it. No, it's not that important, but you know, if you like reading, there you go. And there we have it. So thank you everyone, and this has gone on for a long time, so I'll finish it there and say good night. Thank you all.